Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host Dr. Reid Robison and I have the audacity to talk about authenticity. We talk about what it means to live one's truth, the relationship between personal values and authenticity, what congruence has to do with this whole thing, why being authentic can be risky sometimes, and for certain people in particular, and why we sometimes swear on this show, and of course, much, much more. If any of you are interested in offering psychedelic-assisted therapy to clients, Numinous offers unique training opportunities for mental health practitioners to develop this expertise. These courses are carefully crafted by Numinous professionals like myself, Reid, Joe, and other excellent folks to offer a variety of high-quality learning experiences. If you'd like to learn more about these training opportunities, you can find the link in the show notes below, or you can visit numinous.com/training. That's numinous.com/training. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by leaving a review in places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Especially those written reviews in Apple Podcasts, it really shows people what they're in for if they choose to listen to our show. So we really appreciate that. Without further ado, here is today's episode on authenticity. So Reid, I was lucky enough to have gone to London a few weeks ago to go to a training out there hosted by the company Compass Pathways, but which was awesome. It was cool to be there, but I got to bring my wife along. She's always wanted to go to, I guess, back to London. She lived there for a little while when she was in college. She loves the history there. She's a history buff. And one of the things we got to do was see Les Mis, a London production of Les Mis. It's probably my favorite. I almost said music video.
I love that music video.
It's such a great music video.
It's a good book too.
Yeah. One of my favorite musicals, and the production was so moving. I mean, we were in tears. It's amazing how many times I can listen to that music or see that production and still be so moved. Moved by, of course, the message, the story, but the performance was just so good, so good. But one of my favorite songs is "Who Am I?" So Valjean sings, "Who am I?"
I was just going to sing it, so I'm glad you did. We got to get it in people's heads.
That's right. So, in there, his story arc is it's such a interesting treatise on morality and integrity and honesty. And, he's got this great story arc. But the song, "Who Am I?" He's deciding whether or not he's going to rescue, basically, this other man who has been confused for him. This man's going to go to jail. I get to go free. And he's grappling with whether or not he should come forward as the real Valjean. There's all these workers that depend on me. Mm-hmm. And the famous line in there is, "If I speak, I am condemned. If I stay silent, I am damned." Mm-hmm. It's such an interesting dichotomy and moral quandary. So I was thinking a lot about that as I was preparing for today's episode, where we decided we might talk and riff a little bit about authenticity, integrity, honesty, being genuine. What do those things really mean? What do they mean in a therapeutic context and just a sort of everyday life context? And maybe we'll weave it back into psychedelics one way or another.
And back into Les Mis. I love that book. In fact, I read the book first before seeing the musical or any movie about it. But because Victor Hugo is just a literary master. And in fact, I once read that the name Jean Valjean, the Val means worth. And so like John is worthy of John.
Oh,
John is worthy of himself. John is as worthy as any other John. Yes. And I think it's a perfect segue, that "Who Am I?" scene, or the whole story, a perfect segue into this topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What does it mean? What does it mean to be authentic? Because you hear a lot of it, especially in pop psychology nowadays, like be yourself, be true to yourself, be you, others will adapt, live your truth. A lot of talk about your truth out there.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be authentic?
Yeah, it can be dizzying because authenticity has become such a buzzword among content creators where there is a significant struggle to be truly authentic. And that's one thing I like to remember is authenticity is a great ideal, and like almost a moral imperative, right? But it's kind of like being perfect in that I believe it's never perfectly attainable. It's something we're constantly striving for. And then the other part of it for me is that authenticity is kind of fluid. Like authenticity is based on your identity and your values and your truth at the time, and that changes over time for everyone. And so for me, it's about tuning into the inner voice in the here and now and practicing not only tuning in, but speaking that and living in accordance with the values the best you know how as you flow through life.
I'm glad you brought up the parallels to perfectionism. That can be really stressful. It's certainly stressful for me, thinking, I got to be authentic. I got to be honest. I got to be my real self. When, maybe to riff a bit on what you said, like living life according to your values, like you described, you're also doing that while trying to accommodate for social pressures, right? Like you might show up one way in one social context and show up a completely different way in another social context. And both of those ways that you're showing up might still be you. They might still be authentically you, but you're trying to manage who you are with respect to social pressures, expectations, making it in a social world.
Yeah, to highlight that, which I think is a really good point, is authenticity is like how you share, or it's context dependent versus something like transparency being what you share.
Oh, interesting.
And that is, it certainly depends on like the situation, and use your wisdom to know what and when to share. It's like, did you ever see the movie The Invention of Lying with Gwyneth Paltrow? And it's about this fictitious world where lying doesn't exist yet until one guy figures out how to lie. And because no one can lie, anything he says, he just goes into a bank and says, I'd like to withdraw the $12,000 that's in my account. Like, oh, it is, here you go. And then it just gets into these really interesting like quandaries about complimenting, like, how does this hat look on me? Do I, how does my hair look? And it highlights the fact that like no one is perfectly honest as humans when you account for all of the things we withhold. And sometimes we withhold them because like the brutal truth can be actually quite jarring.
Right. Yeah. There's a difference, I think, between maybe what you might call prosocial lies and antisocial lies. I've heard prosocial lies called blue lies as opposed to like white lies, little white lies, where we don't, if somebody asks us, how does this hat look on me? Like you said, and we don't love the way the hat looks on this person, but we love that person, we might tell a quote prosocial lie. Oh, it looks great, because we care, like we want to be kind. What's true about us, we're being authentic about our love for this person. That's, I guess you could make the argument that that prosocial lie is not necessarily inauthentic, even if it is dishonest.
Yeah. So another way to look at the difference would be congruence, a word I really like, and honesty. Like they're not the same thing, because in congruence, like you choose what you say to people and what you share with the world judiciously, like using that judicious wisdom, versus like honesty is, it can be brutal if you're talking about like when someone's asking for an opinion or compliments.
Yeah. And in order, I guess, to demonstrate some authenticity, I'm kind of thinking out loud about these concepts. I don't know that I have a completely fully formed treatise on the moral aspects of authenticity and honesty and quote unquote prosocial or antisocial lies. But this is one of the things I really like about podcasting, about people who are willing to think out loud in public. I think about the people that I have invited into my social world, the people I'm drawn to, people I like working with. It's people who are willing to be wrong, people who are willing to express opinions and maybe even get a little bit of flack for those opinions. I think you and I are pretty careful on this podcast. Like, we certainly don't want to alienate anybody. We don't want to ruffle feathers unnecessarily. We want to be kind and gentle. We've gotten feedback that we sort of come across that way, but I think that's authentic. I mean, you and I are pretty gentle dudes for the most part.
It's a good question. Is it, given the context, is it at the expense of full authenticity? Like, I know when you and I started doing this, there was a lot of fear we would share about being oneself in a like work sponsored podcast. Like, can we swear? Can we tell super vulnerable stories, embarrassing stories?
Right. The swearing one's interesting because, believe it or not, folks, Reid and I have talked a lot about whether or not we should swear in this podcast. And the times when we have, and we're not dropping the most vile of swear words, but we've gotten some feedback that some people don't like it. And I've also ironically gotten some feedback that some people actually do love hearing a swear word or two from us. The people who have told me that, in part, say like it makes you seem more like a real person. And truth be told, I swear in my normal life, sometimes a lot, depending on how angry I am, or and how much pain I am, or how frustrated I am.
Yeah, and authenticity is kind of blocked by social pressures or societal conditioning, like what we feel like we should do versus what is like innately true and alive in us. And so swearing is just an interesting example, a tricky one too, because like we both grew up as Mormon boys, where swearing was swearing was bad in the cultural context. And so, yeah, that wasn't authentically part of me until later in life, but there were those blocks to authenticity. Not that you should be born swearing, right? It's one of those highly nuanced ones that highlights the difficult nature. Like, no one is perfectly authentic in all dealings, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you and I were talking with our colleague Neil Barclay about swearing and a few weeks ago, and like, what do you tell your kids? Because like you said, I grew up just with the rule that swearing was bad. It was sinful. It was un-Christ-like or whatever. So that was easy. Oh, I just don't swear. And when I do swear, I should feel guilty. And I need to fix that. I need to repent. Yeah. So raising my kids outside of a religious context now, but still wanting to teach them authentic, moral, prosocial behavior, and grappling with this, these words are not inherently bad, but in our social context, they communicate certain things. So if you're going to use these words, use them with skill. And Neil gave the example of, you can't drive a car until you're 16. There's some reasons behind that. And you have to learn some things before somebody gives you the keys to a car. I thought that was a pretty good metaphor.
I like that. And so with this example and authenticity, because it gets kind of muddy, let me try and clarify a little bit. So if authenticity is being your true self, unconstrained by external influences, but like considering the context, I think if we were to break it down academically, like people have literally written authenticity inventories and researched them. And I think those components give maybe a clearer picture of what it is. Like one being self-awareness, like awareness of your own motives, like if you want to swear or not, like if it's not important to you and you don't swear ever, then you could still be authentic, right? And then unbiased processing. We were talking earlier about how, just the ability to admit that you're wrong and see the errors that we all make in thinking, and see how dupable humans can be, that unbiased processing. And then what else is there? There's behavior, and then there's like relational orientation. Like, one component of it being, how are you in close relationships where authenticity can and should really come to the surface?
I like those components. I like that it starts with self-awareness. Hard to be authentic to who you really are if you don't know who you really are. But that word "really are," it gives me the chills a little bit. Like sometimes my clients we'll grapple with this. We'll talk about it in therapy. I want to know who I really am.
Yeah.
I want to know what's really going on. And it implies that if they understood who they quote unquote really were, then they would know how to resolve their suffering. They would know how to act in every situation in a way that would make them feel proud of themselves. And I think it's just more slippery than that for all the reasons we're talking about. Who I really am has shifted in my life a lot.
It's fluid, this whole, there's an impermanence about authenticity, right? And because in fact, depending on what you believe about the human condition, I think like in my belief system, a good part of it is discovering and remembering who we are, like both from a psychological, developmental perspective and spiritual one.
Yeah, it isn't. I mean, we constantly quote Ram Dass in here, but I think you'll have to correct me because you know him better than I do. But maybe in that "Sitting Around the Fire" song, he talks about the waking up to the hilarity of the human predicament,
absurdity of your own predicament.
You aren't who you think you are.
Yeah. In fact, should we read a Ram Dass quote? There was one I sent you last night that is tangentially related to the topic, but I love when he talks about the channels of authenticity. He doesn't call them that, but should we drop a Ram Dass bomb?
Yeah.
I have it right here, I believe. Okay. Who you think you are is not who you really are at all. I've used an example many times in lectures, but it's such a vivid one that it's useful to cut through an awful lot of holdings. It involves the levels of perception, the television receiver, the little dial by the side of your eyes. When that dial is set on channel 5, when you look around the world, you see the physical environment, you see people's bodies. For example, if you were particularly interested in sexual gratification, you might see everybody in terms of a possible sexual partner. And that would be your reality, very physical. That's channel 5. Under those conditions, you might be preoccupied with your own physical being, that your body is too weak or too old, too young or too thin or too fat, or too much of this or too little of that. Always something in the wrong place. When I lived in that reality, I was worried about going bald. Flip to channel 6. Now you've entered into the psychological domain, and you look at everybody as happy, sad, righteous, lazy, etc. You could call yourself a manic depressive. You could say, I wish I was as happy as everyone else. Or I'm a young woman looking into the future. Or I'm a mother. That's a social psychological role. I'm a good citizen, or I don't care about anything. I'm seeking God. That's a nice one, but these are all psychological. Try channel 7. Now you look out of the world, and there are 12 categories. You're a Leo. I'd know you anywhere. I'm an Aries. That explains it. Thus far, 6 and 7 have all been the game of individual differences. How are you different from me? Channel 8. When I look into someone's eyes, I see someone else looking back at me. Someone just like me in there. Are you in there? I'm in here, far out. How did you get into that one? Like that people suit. At that point, you're aware of all the individual differences as packaging, and you're seeing that which is the same in you as it is in me, which in Hinduism is called the Jivatman, and in Christianity is called the soul. Let's flip once more to channel 9. When I turn to channel 9, it is as though two mirrors were facing each other with nothing in between. It is yourself looking at yourself. For on channel 9, there is only one of us, and we are the ancient one. In that reality, on channel 9, we are acting like the many in order to carry out this illusion. And there is only one of us doing all this, the one behind the many. One more flip, channel 10. Flip into channel 10 and you disappear, and that which you were looking at disappears. It all returns to the formless, to that which lies behind the one, the essence of one, or what the Buddhists call nirvana. Channels 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all levels of relative reality, all within the domain of form. Channel 10 is the reality of the formless which lies beneath or behind all forms. Ram Dass.
Yeah, in true Ram Dass fashion, those sentiments, those ideas make me want to have compassion for myself. They make me want to have compassion for others because, who you think you are or who you think you ought to be might be relative to whatever channel that you're on.
Yeah. And it's a nonlinear developmental process through these channels or phases. I mean, different frameworks for looking at it, but I like this one for its simplicity and hilarity, you know, of just knowing that sometimes we can be in a channel of preoccupied with, say, like he said, physical appearances, or we could be preoccupied with how someone's doing in their psychological form in this world, or how we're doing. But I love, like, as you progress through those and you start to see through the absurdity of your own predicament, that you are actually in this people suit on this planet as a soul peering out into other souls. And sometimes you get this aha moment of like, wait, I see you in there. And maybe sometimes that veil pierces and you can feel that we are actually one. Mm-hmm. The other Ram Dass story that I like is about when he, well, I don't know if it was after he discovered psychedelics or before, but he started to feel stuffy in the suit and the mask that was his upbringing. And he started to go to different therapists, psychiatrists, and then realized that all they were doing was trying to get him to put on their suit. And then eventually he's like, screw that. I'm ditching all the suits and wearing my own. And I mean, he's an example of evolving. He calls it becoming nobody, but becoming Ram Dass involved even like growing out a big beard like Steve and changing his name, which you have not done yet. Oh, you went from Steven to Steve.
That's true. I did. For reasons. Anyway, continue on.
Yeah, well, no, that's it. He realized that he gets to decide and kind of create his own persona.
Not without controversy. Right. That's one thing I think about a lot, about being oneself. Like what would it mean to become Steve Thayer or Stephen Thayer? The things that maybe prevent me from stepping into authenticity are like, kind of like we were talking about before, our social pressures. I don't want to get rejected. I don't want to be hated. I don't want to hurt somebody with an opinion that might be hurtful, right? And so, to use a term that's also fairly popular right now, sometimes I will mask. I will mask what I really think or how I really feel to protect myself and to protect other people. I think about, as therapists, when I bring a client back and, they're like, hey, how was your day? How are you feeling? How are you doing? Right? These sort of perfunctory phrases we use in our language. And if I'm not doing well, I'm not going to say, you know what? I'm not doing well. I'm really tired. I'm really stressed. In part because I don't want to make their session that's about them, that they're paying for, about me. We're trained not to do this in graduate school, right? That being said, it's also okay, in my opinion, for therapists to model being human. Like, you know what? I'm feeling pretty tired today, but I'm managing. I'm really excited to help you with whatever you've got going on today. There are ways that you can communicate how you can respond to that question, quote unquote, authentically. But sometimes that question isn't asked because they want to actually know how you're feeling. Like a lot of times it's just a salutation.
Yeah, and again, in your example, authenticity is like how you share it, and it's still true to yourself, but it's context dependent, versus the like unfiltered transparency may be truth-telling about your terrible day, but inappropriately so for someone who's really in need of your support in that session.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're making this point about the sort of unfiltered transparency, because I didn't have that terminology for it before, but I do know that it bothers me when people sort of under the guise of authenticity will just be tactless jerks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just being authentic, man. I'm just, just calling it like it is. Giving you some tough love. I think you can still be authentic and have tact. Like you said, like the way you deliver the message matters, and it can still be authentic.
Yeah. And an example, I think earlier I was telling you about this Britney Spears quote I stumbled upon. And it's a bit of a rabbit hole that I don't want to go down because there's so many like so many parts of it, but she said something like, people can take everything from you but your truth. And the question is, can you handle my truth? And, she's been in quite a journey and predicament of her own around mental health and around having a, guardian or conservator like around her finances and just involuntary commitment to mental health treatment and all that stuff that is such tricky territory. So you've got, like, on the one hand, the internet rallying behind her, like Free Britney, and then you have you have her parents just kind of quietly thinking whatever, who knows, and her speaking up about it sometimes. About I thought that was a profound quote.
Yeah. It reminds me of a phrase I hear on the internet sometimes. If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. And I don't know how I feel. I don't know how I feel about that statement, or whether or not it's the most mentally healthy or socially healthy drum to beat. Or
couple things come to mind, and we're not certainly going to solve this. We're just highlighting the challenge with authenticity is something I heard in med school. One of my professors in psychiatry, way back before I even went into psychiatry, was like, everyone can look borderline under enough pressure. And while today, after doing a lot of a decade of clinical work and research, including studies around borderline, I don't agree with it literally, but I think it's really telling in that, we all have our breaking point. And the other thing I was going to say is I read this little internet quote that said, "We have all had relationships that nearly put us in a psych ward. Drop a like if you can resonate," or something. And, for many people, that's true. Like, the buttons that get pushed in close relationship bring up our deepest and most hidden and sometimes feared neuroses.
Yeah, that's a good commentary on common humanity. It does make me think, though, about the perils of authenticity. For some people to be, quote unquote, who they really are can be really perilous, can be dangerous. I'm thinking about the LGBTQ kid growing up in a family where if they come out, they could be disowned, or real violence could be done to them.
It shows why authenticity doesn't develop in so many people at a young age, because you've got these two forces, like attachment and authenticity. And so if your attachment figures, your parents, who we as humans depend on for our survival at a longer age than other species, at an older age than other species, then if they're not there, and if we have our desire for authenticity that's kind of innate in some ways, if those things are at odds, you will sacrifice your authenticity over and over for survival at a young age. And it happens, and that's where people grow up not knowing who they are, and have to rediscover that.
Yeah. So, to make reference to what I was saying earlier about clients coming in and asking, like, who am I?
Yeah.
That's often why the confusion. I think about my own psychosocial development, and I came into adulthood not necessarily knowing what I thought, not knowing, well, I'll clarify. I wanted to know what the truth was. I wanted to know what the right things were to think and to believe. And so, but I didn't think I could find that in me. I had to find that outside of me. So I had to find the right college professor. I had to find the right mentor. I had to find the right book, the right God, the right deity.
Yeah.
Someone please tell me how to be so that I can be the right way, ultimately so I can be accepted and loved, and it will like, some magic spell will occur and I'll get everything that I deserve and need and want, if only I can be who I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. And so, like, I think it's not uncommon for adults to grow up fearing that they'll lose relationships if they're authentic, if I were really seen. And even in my own journey, just what you said reminds me of the years I spent struggling to speak truthfully about my spiritual beliefs from within a religious community and within a family and within a marriage where that felt dangerous to bring up, of having different beliefs than what you were raised with, or that what you married with, and things like that. That can be extremely terrifying when looking it in the face, even though, on the other side of it, it can be perilous still, or it can be liberating and less of a scary outcome than we think.
Or even worse.
Yeah.
I want to appreciate you sharing what you shared.
Yeah.
Because I want to validate those of you who are listening, for whom being who you really are, saying what you really think, could result in some pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah.
It could result in ending important relationships, or it could result in people responding with anger or prejudice. That's the kinds of stuff that is on the line when we're trying to be who we really are.
Yeah. No, this it does show that part of authenticity that passes it through, not only has the self-awareness, but passes it through that judicious, wise filter, ideally, of the context you're in and the safety needs and the priorities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about myself in contexts, and I'm privileged enough to not have too many contexts where if I am who I feel like I am, it's going to result in some kind of horrible consequence. But I'm very different on this podcast than I would be talking to my brothers, or I'm very different in the therapy room than I would be at home as dad. Like, I have different roles that serve as those contexts, that bring out different sides of me. I remember when I was a Mormon missionary, I was struggling with my mental health, but still trying to do what I thought was right. And I remember I gave a talk in church once, and one of the members of the congregation came up to me and she was like, "Elder Thayer, we didn't realize you had a sense of humor. We didn't realize that you were funny." Because I guess I had sort of a resting seriousness face. And when it came to teaching the members or the members of the community about the religion, I took it really seriously. So a pretty serious, studious, didactic side came out of me. But when I was given a speech, I was trying to be loose and trying to be funny. So I've had that happen a couple of times in my life where people have heard me be a little funny and be like, "Oh, we had no idea you had a personality. we had no idea you had a sense of humor."
Yeah.
So I've tried to allow more of that to come forward and be a little bit more all of me in each context. But it's okay. It's okay to be contextual, Steve.
And isn't it cool how when you do show your true colors, your authentic self, with that, that judicious wisdom of context, that people really connect with it. Like, that vulnerability is not only connecting, but it's contagious, and it gives people the courage to do the same.
I like that, connecting and contagious.
Yeah. So there was a process we used to do that touches on these things when I was working at Center for Change. If you want to try it on or hear about it a little bit, it was passed on to me from one of my mentors, Michael Barrett, psychologist who founded the place, a really beautiful treatment center here in Utah focused on eating disorders. But this was a process around those things we were talking about, of congruence and honesty, and he called it balance, to help you become your authentic self, with the background that congruence is when what we think and feel and do and know to be true are in harmony. Right? So congruence in our emotions, our relationships, our heart, what's speaking from in our metaphorical hearts, our soul, our intuition. And that's when, and congruence with our spiritual beliefs. So if we're not in congruence in these areas, we start to lose or disconnect from parts of ourselves, including our spiritual self, right? And then so integrity is the spiritual side of congruence. Congruence, just like stewardship is the spiritual side of responsibility. So integrity is congruence in our beliefs, our principles, our values, in terms of our spirituality. When we know what our values are, we try to align our life with them. So sound reasonable so far?
Yeah, yeah.
So when these things get closer together, we're aligned, we're attuned, they're more congruent, and that is integrity inside of us. And it includes like deepest desires and hopes and dreams and values and emotions and goals, things like that. So here's the exercise so that people can follow along. In fact, here's a piece of paper for you, Steve.
Nice.
On a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and on the left side, write down 5 of the most important things in your life, priorities that come to mind. And if you're listening, you can follow along, except if you're driving. Then you can still do it mentally. You can free associate here of 5 of the most important things in your life that come up for you. And then, on the other side, 5 current realities that take up most of your time in life. Time and energy. And then the inquiry or the practice is this, to sit with, is my energy going to the things that are most important in my life? Like, there's nothing wrong or right about this list, right? It's just a check-in on ourselves. Like, how is the congruence between what you know in your heart to be good and true and valuable to you, and where you want your time and energy to go, compared to how it's been sucked into certain directions? And it might be, I don't know, thoughts on your on your
I'm
list?
noticing some incongruities. This reminds me of a similar exercise done in ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. You're figuring out what your values are, and then where you're putting your time and energy. It's very almost the same exercise, but yeah, there's some incongruities for sure.
And so instead of getting like down on oneself, like, it's really, there's no good or bad. It's a beautiful chance to check in. And even if there's irritation or anger about how it's been, you can use that as fuel for transformation. Like we as emotion scientists like to figure out ways of transforming emotion with emotion. So what I like to do with that list is just think of one thing you could do this week, this month, whatever, that would move you more in alignment with your priorities, more balanced, more congruent, more personal, internal, unique, authentic integrity to you.
Yeah, I'll share mine. As now that I'm thinking about it. So physical health is really important to me in the form of, physical fitness.
Yeah.
But also the food I put into my body and how much I sleep, that kind of thing. And I'm turning 40 this year, and I kind of feel like the wheels are falling off, and that's probably hilarious to anybody who's much older than 40 to hear me say. But, and I've gotten away. I've gotten away from some of my healthy habits, and I'm incongruent, I guess, with that value of treating my body with love in the form of feeding it nutritious food, and sleeping it, and exercising it. So the one thing I'm going to do is finally pull the trigger on that exercise program I've been meaning to start, that focuses more on longevity and like making my body healthy instead of making my body sexy. And hopefully there's some overlap between the two, but
they're totally incompatible.
Sometimes I feel like they are. I've got bad joints, so a lot of this program is about making my joints healthy, which is usually not making my muscles bigger. But
cool. I'm excited to hear how it goes. I went through the Chick-fil-A drive-through today. I rarely go to buy food, like personally, but yeah, I listened to my body and followed it into the drive-through and had some chicken.
Your body needed a Christian chicken sandwich.
Oh yeah. What do we do with Chick-fil-A's values and authenticity? Maybe we just avoid that topic altogether.
Well, I mean, it brings up something interesting about authenticity. There's the old adage, we don't talk about religion and politics,
Yeah.
in good company, because inevitably it will trigger people, because religion and politics are things that people tend to believe in very, very deeply, like to their core, but sometimes are unwilling to conversate about or debate, to be open about. Because for me, in order to have an authentic conversation with somebody about something I believe in, this is just me, I have to be open to the possibility of having my mind changed.
Yeah.
I got to be open to at least even if there's just a shred of the possibility that I might be wrong about something. And what I've noticed is that, and some of the feedback I've gotten about that, is that it contributes to a fairly relaxed demeanor that put people at ease. One of the consistent sort of positive feedback that I've gotten as a therapist is that I make people really comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's part of it, is like I'm holding my strong opinions very, very loosely. I'm totally cool with being convinced otherwise.
Yeah.
The shadow side of that is sometimes I have a hard time sticking to opinions. I might seem like a waffler. But it's just because in the face of good data or a convincing argument, I'm totally willing to change my mind.
Yeah, and I think that's part of authenticity, the way I see it, is just and that fluid nature we were talking about, is just being very, very open to the possibility that we may have some tightly held false beliefs, and we may be wrong. We may not have all the data, and we're always changing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I enjoyed my Chick-fil-A sandwich, changed my mind. No. Let's debate it.
Right.
But no, I do think, while it is context dependent, and you don't want to bring up like really touchy subjects at the wrong time. And like John Gottman says, there's a soft startup to even difficult conversations, but avoiding them altogether, like I almost did on the religious front, is also like, that's the opposite of authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of another word you used earlier, integrity. I like that word in this conversation because, I like to think of structural integrity. If a bridge has structural integrity, it's gonna do what it's designed to do. It's gonna hold up the bridge above it, like the pillars of the bridge or whatever. It's gonna cross a chasm. It's gonna allow us to travel, and it's gonna withstand the buffeting of the elements. So, if you can have psychological, moral, structural integrity, but also be flexible. So you're flexible like the bamboo reed. You're still strong. You're not brittle and rigid. You can still be who you are and be flexible.
Like a suspension bridge, perhaps. I don't know my structural engineering very well, but I like that tie to integrity, because it is something that is a word that really resonates with me, and I like to sit with, because and I think I share that same approach that you mentioned, is like being flexible, willing to admit I'm wrong, but I just also know how to take in data and analyze it. And like, I may go in with a certain political stance to a conversation, but without like pretending to know everything or having this like argument that can't be disputed. It's an open, receptive stance, right? And because of what we do in work, we have the ability to study a study, test a test, digest literature, and we can we're probably constantly practicing this and disproving hypotheses all the time and trying on new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? I think that openness and receptivity is really, really important in sort of general mental health. A lot of the things that keep people depressed and anxious are their rigid beliefs that make them suffer. One of the things that we think, to tie it back to psychedelics, I feel like I'm obligated to do that given the title of our podcast. But one of the things that psychedelics tends to do, what the research suggests, and my personal experience bears out, is it makes you more flexible. It opens you up to the possibility of changing what were once rigid beliefs.
You can bend and not break.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Well, maybe to sum it up from my end, I like how Brene Brown conceptualizes authenticity. She says it's like this collection of choices we make every day, including the choice to show up real and the choice to show up vulnerably even if we're wrong and just let ourselves be seen.
Yeah. So here's to letting ourselves be seen. Go ahead and email us, folks, if you've got feedback about today's episode or suggestions for new ones. This is Reid and I trying to be authentic.
Hope you like it.
It's okay if you don't. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinous, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinous at numinous.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinous YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.